Today we are going to be talking about how women shaped the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. The era of apartheid can best be defined as an oppressive institutionalized form of segregation that dominated the second half of the 20th century. Originally implemented by an all-white, all-male government, this unfortunate form of systemic racism resulted in severe inequalities between white citizens and those of color. South African society was heavily controlled by patriarchal, Christian nationalist, white supremacist ideologies, resulting in detrimental circumstances for women and for people of color. Despite such unjust disadvantages, these minorities were resilient in their attempts to fight for freedom and equality for all. This brings us to the question, how did South African women contribute to the success of the anti-apartheid movement, and how did they overcome the obstacles of racial and gender-related inequalities to put an end to this era of injustice? The women of South Africa proved extremely successful in their anti-apartheid efforts through the construction of all-female organization, the oversight of boycotts, and the massive demonstrations in which they protested the oppressive labor laws imposed on them and their husbands. There were few anti-apartheid activist organizations in existence within South Africa prior to the 1970s, apart from the Women's Defense of the Constitution League, also known as Black Sash. This organization consisted of apolitical, nonviolent white women who wished to work for justice in apartheid South Africa. These female volunteers, with the help of translators, tried to assist those who came in endless streams seeking work, housing, food, legal aid, word of imprisoned family members, help with passes, race classification, and 100 other Black-only problems. In addition, the Black Sash published numerous Black women's stories in which they discussed the extremely detrimental and unjust circumstances regarding education, housing, and the working conditions they were forced to endure during this time. The women of the Black Sash proved extremely successful in their attempts to spread awareness by developing public education programs to inform the white population of the effects of government action, including the pass laws, the migratory labor system, banishment of Africans, removals, urban area population controls, detention without trial, etc. The Black Sash played an extremely critical role in the integration and therefore the growth of the anti-apartheid movement. The Bantu Education Act allowed the government complete control over the education of African children. This included the ability to dictate who is selected to teach and what subjects are approved to be taught. This curriculum was referred to as Christian national education, and its objective clearly was to inculcate in the children a belief in the absolute superiority of the white race. This event in history is critical to understanding how truly institutionalized this form of racism was in South African society. The South African pass laws legally required working Black men and later women to carry permits in order to lawfully maintain an occupation. By requiring the working African population to surrender half of their wage on a monthly basis to buy these passes, the pass laws resulted in severe inequalities between the white South Africans and those of color. Specifically regarding living conditions, which we can see here. Women responded to this systemically racist legislation by forming mass demonstrations in which they unitedly burned the passes distributed to them by their oppressive government. These occurrences were prominent throughout the nation, and each event exemplified the unwavering manner in which South African women supported and advocated for each other. On occasion, when police arrived in a country village to arrest about 20 women who had burned their passbooks, they were met with 200 women patiently sitting under the trees who responded to officers' presence by declaring, "If you arrest one, you must arrest us all." On June 18, 1959, the African women of the Cato Menorshach settlement organized a demonstration out of protest of the inadequate living conditions and unfair wages imposed on themselves and their husbands. This was one of many peaceful protests that ended with a violent response from police. The defenseless women in this photo can be seen being beaten with batons, many with babies strapped to their backs. The events that unfolded on this day acted as fuel, furthering the effort in the resistance of apartheid. The sacrifices these rural female activists made out of concern for their husbands was greatly recognized throughout South Africa. In fact, the African National Congress offered their own praise for the women of Cato Manor by displaying a banner during a 1959 conference that proclaimed, "We thank the women." When learning of the era of apartheid in South Africa, the majority of the information available to us revolves around powerful, well-known figures. However, the role of women was crucial in the ending of apartheid, and their efforts are even more significant due to the extreme obstacles of racial and gender-related inequalities that they were forced to overcome. Through their unanimous rejection of the oppressive pass laws, their advocacy for proper education for their children, and the creation of organizations that acted as support systems for women in need, the female population of South Africa refused to adapt to the institutionally racist and misogynistic society in which they lived.